Welcome back to the Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services podcast. Today I'm glad to have Craig Stickling with me and Brian.
Good morning to you, Matt.
And Brian.
Yeah, it's great to be with you today.
And I'm Matt Kaufman. Glad to have you along here today as we continue the topic of building sexual character in our children. We've spoken in past podcasts about the nature of God and how that impacts our understanding of intimacy and how important that is as we train up our children in the way of their beliefs and values and needs. Today we're going to get into more of the nuts and bolts of the practical how is that done for a parent to have these conversations with our children. Because of the nature of the sensitivity of the topic, parents may want to use discretion on playing this audio with young children around. So, Craig, I'd like to turn to you first, and I'd like you to address and get this conversation started with the question, what do we want our kids to know?
The most important thing to just start off this conversation with is remembering that God has a great design for our children and for their bodies. We can even just begin at the beginning of the Bible and look at the Genesis picture of God creating male and female and saying it was very good, and to be reminded of that. And Psalm 139 talks about that. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's a great picture that we want to start this topic off with regarding our kids.
As we look at that Genesis account, Craig, very clearly shame entered the world after the fall. And is that some of our inhibitions when it comes to this topic? Is it because it's shrouded in the fall of man?
Satan loves darkness, doesn't he? And he loves to keep things dark and covered, and he loves to just keep them out of the lens of light and out of truth. God has designed them and their uniqueness as male and female, and that's a beautiful gift that he has given them. And we want our kids to be able to know that lesson and to know it early.
And so to have a naked little one run across the floor, run across the house after a bath, and the older ones shrieking, and they have some understanding that the little one doesn't have, I guess that's teed up for the conversation.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing when you think about this topic and just part of kids and their curiosity, that they know something's going on, and like you just described there with the youngest, and they really don't have a clue, but the oldest ones are a little bit like, they shouldn't be doing this, and this isn't right, but, everybody's laughing or nervous, and there's just part of they have been designed with this, and there is this curiosity, and we as parents get to step in and say, help them understand what their bodies are, and hopefully help bring truth, like Craig was talking about, to push back the shame and begin to say, this has been designed by God and is a good thing, and let's learn about it.
I have caught myself, and now I'm going to ask you as clinicians to counsel me. I've caught myself seeing that curiosity in my children and trying to squash it, saying, okay, they are curious about this, and I don't think they're ready for the answers that they're curious about, so let me try to help make their curiosity go away.
We want to protect our kids, and so I want to stop that curiosity. I'd love just to be able to put a cap or a cover on it and say, well, maybe 20 years from now we'll take that off and we'll have that conversation. But you mentioned curiosity, and that won't go away, will it?
But you do say there are some limits here, and you get to be the one that navigates and says, how much information, when is that information conveyed, and through what lens do I want it to convey it?
So the question that we posed is, what do we want our kids to know? And we've really answered that they want to know it. And we've talked a little bit about that answer and being about our bodies. What are some of the other finer points that our kids should know?
Yeah, I think, for example, my kids are really young. I've got a 3.5 and a 2-year-old. I think one of the things that at this point I want them to know is that there are parts of their body that are private, that have been set aside for just them, that they are unique, that they are sacred, and for them to know that the parts of their body that are covered by a swimming suit, for example, are not to be touched by anyone other than mom or dad or somebody else that is an authority over them that we trust, such as grandma and grandpa. That would be a place to start, perhaps.
In the healthy sense of touching, in terms of bathing and appropriate discipline.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about there. And even being able to describe, some beginning parts of that at an early age, just as a way to protect them, and so that they know if somebody that they don't know touches them in their private areas or in areas that mom and dad have said, hey, this shouldn't be touched, or it shouldn't be touched in this way, if that occurs, then hopefully we've opened that door and they would come and talk to mom and dad.
Craig, as you work in counseling with parents and kids, do you find clients who have been abused before they were made even aware of the abuse? And do you see that as this teaching piece as part of how we prepare our kids and protect our kids even?
Probably one of the saddest, most hurtful experiences for a child to go through is to be taken advantage of, or to be touched inappropriately, or to have some action taken upon them that they're not even sure what is happening and why that's happening, and that just the confusion and the shame and the hurt and the misunderstanding, and sometimes just the confusion that brings, and the lifelong impact that can have. And to be able to take some safeguards for our children when they're young, to give them the tools of understanding, is huge to that.
So having that discussion for that young child is a protective piece for their well-being, sexual well-being.
Yeah, and we look at the next step. Brian talked about his children being younger, and then as our kids get older, we naturally are driven to relationships, aren't we? And as that relationships start to attract, and we start to notice the child there, and kind of go, I think I like that one. There's something, and that naturalness of that desire kind of pulling, as that grows, we want our kids to know what to do with that. And we want them, more importantly, to know that God put that desire into their heart, but He did it with a plan and with a purpose.
And I think with that, for parents to be able to know their children well enough to know the ones that are really more geared towards physical touch, or maybe geared towards, wanting, intimacy and that sort of a thing, and being able to come alongside them, helping give them an avenue of what's appropriate, how to fulfill that when they're 10 years old. And all of that really lends itself to teaching about their bodies, how God's created their bodies, so that it's done in a way that's according to God's plan.
Okay, now you dropped a number, 10 years old. When is an appropriate age to talk to our children?
It's very important that we look at this topic, not maybe in the old lens of, as long as I need to have one good talk with them and then that covers it. But I think we approach this topic and says, I want to be able to have multiple conversations over multiple years of growth with my child as I look at this topic.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key of, it's not when, it's just how do I do it, and knowing when is it appropriate at different stages. What do you tell a 3-year-old versus a 5-year-old versus a 7-year-old versus a 10-year-old? And it's not only going to depend on age, but just where they're at in maturity and where their curiosity is. But I think parents are going to err on the side of saying, they're probably not ready. And so you're going to need probably somebody or something to kind of push you and say, why don't you open that door a bit?
So help us know where to begin. I've benefited from that whole discussion about the fallen in the garden and privacy and that type of thing. I think that's helpful. But Brian, you just alluded to appropriate teaching at appropriate ages. And so we beg the question, what is appropriate at what age?
Well, I think it brings up one of the resources that we really appreciate and enjoy here, often recommended at Apostolic Christian Counseling and Family Services, is a resource that how and when to talk to your kids about sex, and it's God's design for sex, and it's a series that kind of puts information in an age-appropriate progression, and I think that's a good place to start, to maybe look at a resource like that, and that could give you a little bit of a blueprint of, what do you share with a 3-year-old, so on and so forth. And it also gives you a resource that kind of you and your child can come alongside and look at together versus kind of having to sit down face-to-face on a topic that can feel pretty daunting.
Craig, can you share some examples that this book might lay out? And I know we don't want to pigeonhole, if they're 5 years old, this is appropriate, or if they're 10 years old or 12 years old, but just give us a few ideas.
The first book really looks at an age range of 3 to 5. So we as mom and dads, we can determine a little bit of where our child's maturity level is, and being able to understand that somewhere in that range, there's a book out there. It's called The Story of Me, and it's just a very gentle opening picture that looks at Adam and Eve and the God's design for even boys and girls being different. That then turns into the next book, Before I Was Born, which is ages 5 to 8 approximately. Book number 3 looks at What's the Big Deal? Now we're getting into some of that pre-puberty, 8 to 11. And then the final book of the series for the kids is called Facing the Facts, and that really, for that preteen, age 11 to 14, drives really home the foundation of God's design for them.
I can hear myself asking this question, and I would imagine many others are saying, Craig, Brian, can we broach these topics too early?
Well, I would say that definitely is a possibility, and I don't think Craig or I are advocating that you need to go into fine detail with really young kids. But for them to have a basic understanding of their bodies and why they feel the things they feel, why they have the curiosity that they do, and what that's intended for is hugely important. And then as they go, then to go more into the fine details is essential. And you're probably going to feel like you're giving too much too early. But I think the viewpoint I would say is that you want to be the teacher. You want to be the one that's talking to them about things that are really hard to talk about. You want to be the one that says, no, this is what that is, this is what it means, and this is what it looks like through God's lens.
So we have the opportunity to define the terms.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly what we want to do so that there's understanding, there's clarity, and that it's built on truth and not fiction.
And then I would imagine, and I'm not a psychiatrist, but I would imagine there's some unwinding that needs to be done if their first exposure is dirty and their first exposure is sin and wrong, to unwind that and try to get it back into the parameters of God ordained and God created.
The blessing of that is truth sets us free, and truth becomes the light.
There's folks that are listening, parents that are listening, and they haven't done this. In fact, they think, I haven't started at 3 to 5? Are you kidding me? And here my kids are 12 and 14 or even older or somewhere. Is there any hope? Is this beyond being redeemed? Help that parent know where to go.
I would say it's probably too late. They should probably just sell their kids or give them away at this point.
Oh, wow. That was Craig Stickling, and I think it is. I mean, with parenting, there's always, you find out down the road there's something you wish you would have done differently. I mean, isn't that the nature of parenting? And I think that's the beauty of it, that of course you haven't done it perfectly. No one in this room is claiming that we've done it perfectly, but it's about saying, how do we sharpen each other and how do we help each other engage the things that maybe we've neglected? How do we step into it, not with shame, not with fear, but with courage and with truth and with wisdom and humility and repentance and those sort of things. And that therefore, no matter where your child is, go for it. Just go for it. Start the discussion. You're probably going to be nervous and shaken, and it's a hard topic to talk about. But step into the water and see where it goes.
That's the beauty of the gospel, isn't it? That it provides the truth to set us free before we find ourselves in harm, and it is the truth that sets us free from the harm we may have found ourselves in.
And it's not hard for us as mom and dads to get on the guilt train and look at what we haven't done right and compare ourselves to others, and that's such a hard thing, and it comes sometimes so easily for us. So we look at it from a redemptive process.
And there you have Craig Stickling weighing in that he's going to buy those kids back.
We're going to buy those back. We're not ready to give them away just yet.
That's right. Don't throw the towel in.
I think everybody would agree that we live in different times. The generation before us and the generation before them had different issues, and the culture was different, and the demands on them was different. What do we need to be aware of as it relates to sexual character?
Information is instantaneous. Even young children, very young, are taught that if you need to find the answer to something, there's a neat thing on the computer, and it's a web browser. And I can just type in a question, and I can get an answer, I can get a map, I can get a picture in just like 0.2 of a second.
And really, a lot of that's difficult to filter, isn't it? Even with the filters we have on our computers. Google Images, for example, you can put some benign things in there and get the images that you are really looking after.
We will not get the lens that God wants us to have for our kids. They will not get a biblical lens of this is a great gift. Their body is a great gift, and it's meant to be valued and kept private and in a sense to be kept sacred in a special way.
And I think that's why one of the tools that parents need to use is filtering and blocking things on the internet. But like you mentioned there, Matt, that it would be foolish to think that you can protect your kids from all of those things that you're mentioning, Craig. That it is just so much of it out there. So we have to have more than just filters. We want to teach our kids the truth, and we want to help build up skills so that they can manage and live in a world where the culture around them is going to be living out things that are contrary to what is true.
Well, I think a hot topic of concern for parents, for any child in a formal education, and certainly a public education, is what do we think about sex education class? How do we think through sex ed? Should my kid be in the class? Should I pull them from the class? Help us think through that.
There may be some situations where it is absolutely probably the best decision based on either curriculum or the presenter to say, you know what, I don't want my child to be part of this. But another flip side of that is as we engage and strengthen our children in the truth of what they know, of that if they go through this lessons and we have them go through this and they've already been presented the truth through a biblical Christ-centered lens, there's so much opportunity then for us to follow up and have discussions with our kid that evening. Hey, what'd you talk about? How is that different than what we shared? Or maybe how is it the same? And so we're able to reinforce in our minds and our hearts of our children, this is what's taught out there. How's it match up with what we know God wants us to live in here?
Yeah, and in the right situation, like you're describing there, Craig, it gives parents an opportunity to help deal with real-life stuff with their kids as they go through that and give them coaching and teaching while they're under their authority, while they're willing to listen and be influenced and shaped by mom and dad, and can be a really powerful thing.
Thanks, Craig and Brian, again, for this insightful conversation about the sexual character of our children, and in particular, our role as parents, as it's been given by God to help shape that character. And by God's grace, each of us will be able to do that. Thanks for listening in today. Feel free to go to our website at accounseling.org, and under the Parenting tab, you'll find resources and helps along the way. Have a great day.